as you can probably see behind me, I have a massive book haul. There's more in my lap. So I hope you're ready for what is a pretty huge book haul. Sit tight, get cozy, grab a cup of tea. That's what everyone says to do. I never do it, but maybe you do, so pause now. But I think our time would be best used to jump straight in. So the 6 books I have in my lap here are all from Vintage Books, and they are their new beautiful Virginia Woolf collection. This is a selection of her fiction and non-fiction, all with beautiful covers. They did a very similar thing with a selection of the Bronte sisters and all of Jane Austen's work, and I absolutely love them. And when I get my Brontes and Austens back from my parents' home in Scotland, I can't wait to have them all next to one another. But what I do have from Virginia Woolf is The Years, and this one I don't know that much about actually, but I believe it follows a middle class family in London over the course of 50 years from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. But the next one I've definitely heard a lot more about, and that's Mrs. Dalloway. This one follows one woman for one day. I believe it's about her planning a party and sort of reflecting on the past and different memories as she goes about doing that during her day. This one's quite a short little one, so I really have no excuse for not having read this yet, but now that I have my own copy, there'll be no stopping me. Then we have one I have read, and that is A Room of One's Own. This is one of her non-fiction titles. This is an essay all about women writers and artists and how they've been sort of excluded from those spaces for such a long time, mainly because of their exclusion from owning property and having money, and you need money to have the time and space to be an artist. So although this one's very much about how women have been excluded from those spaces over history, it also very much applies to anyone really from the working classes. So really fascinating read. I've done a whole video about this one actually, so I'll link that if you're interested. And we have Orlando, which is really famous, but again, I'm not that familiar with the contents, but I do believe it plays a lot with gender, and the character Orlando is both a man and a woman in this book, although it might be sort of a generational thing. I'll have to find out within. Then we have The Waves, which is about 6 children who we first meet when they are children and friends playing, and it follows each one throughout their life. And lastly we have To the Lighthouse, which once again is incredibly famous, but more a title that I'm familiar with than an actual plot. But I do know it is set on the Isle of Skye in Scotland, and I love the Isle of Skye. So really that's all you need to tell me to get me to read this one. And also I know it's by Virginia Woolf, who's a fantastic writer. I also meant to mention that they have these gorgeous illustrated back pages to the covers, which are just beautiful as well. These would make gorgeous gifts. But moving on, I have 3 books I picked up for myself. I was part of a sort of booktube meetup come event at Libria in London, which is an independent bookshop, with Sana, Jen, Lauren and Lena, who I will of course all link down below. They're all fabulous. Don't know what you're doing if you're not subscribed to them all already. But loads of other people came along, booktubers and not booktubers, just people who like to watch booktube, and it was so much fun. We were there for like 2.5 hours, and of course I ended up getting some books. First up I got American Housewife by Helen Ellis. I have seen this one around and been meaning to pick it up for ages. It's a collection of short stories, and I first saw it on Brittany from Under the Radar Books channel, so again she will be linked down below and I would highly recommend you check her out. But it even has a Margaret Atwood recommendation on the front which says, "Surreal tales of American weirdness with details that ring all too true. Ouch, I say at times, at other times, yikes." I think these are also quite darkly comical short stories, which sounds right up my street, and in love with this cover. I think it's such good fun, so I'm hoping I love this one. I then got a book that I feel like everyone's been talking about, and that's The Good Immigrant, edited by Nikesh Shukla, and this is a collection of essays by various different people from various different ethnic minorities about being from an ethnic minority and about being an immigrant or a migrant in Britain today, and it sounds amazing. It's getting such good reviews and it sounds incredibly important and fascinating, and I like that it's including so many different voices. I think that'll be really interesting to see them all there together. So what more can I say, really? And then lastly, I feel like the last person to pick this book up, and that is Citizen, an American Lyric by Claudia Rankine. And this is poetry which I believe is all about police brutality towards black people in America. So racism and the militarisation of the police that is still very prevalent today. It sounds incredibly powerful. I'm sure it's going to be a very emotional read and one I'd love to sit down and read from cover to cover. The next two books were given to me by my lovely friend Jen, who I've already mentioned, as she was having a book clear out, and these two struck me as being quite interesting. They were both titles I'd seen floating around a little bit, so I thought I'd give them a shot. And the first one is Pond by Claire Louise Bennett, and I believe this is all about living a solitary lifestyle. It follows one woman who lives in a very rural coastal area by herself and just lives quite a solitary lifestyle, which is a very interesting topic, especially in terms of choosing to be single. And I believe it's also about her relationship with the area and the landscape around her. I then have Vixen by Rosie Garland. Look at this cover! I'm pretty sure that's the reason I wanted it, let's be honest. If I dig deep in my mind, why did I want this book? Because it's beautiful. But what's inside is a historical novel set in the 1300s about the Black Death, which sounds pretty fascinating in itself, so, you know, I'll accept the contents along with the cover. Has somebody just started mowing their lawn? It was the Hoover. The rest of these books are all from publishers, and the first one is The Other World Whispers by Stephanie Victoire, and this is a collection of short stories published by Salt. I believe these are all fantasy or magical realism short stories. They mention gods and goddesses, fairies and folklore on the back. So, I mean, I'm all about this. There's 9 stories in all, and it just sounds like really magical. Speaking of magical, look at this cover! A Most Magical Girl by Karen Foxley. This was sent to me by Piccadilly, and it is a children's book, and it just looks like exactly the kind of children's book I would have loved as a child. It looks so magical. It's about a little girl who's sent to go and live with her aunts, having lived a pretty uneventful life up until now, but it turns out her aunts are witches, and maybe she's a witch too. How great does that sound, right? Then the next one was sent to me by Hotkey, and it was recommended to me by someone on Twitter when I was asking for recommendations of YA books with political themes, particularly protagonists who were actively involved in politics. And I had got so many interesting recommendations that I've made a note of, but one of them was this, and the people at Hotkey were kind enough to send me a copy, so I could not say no, and that is The Big Lie by Julie Mayhew, and this is set in a contemporary Britain, I believe, but a Nazi Britain, or at least a Nazi England. It says Nazi England on the back. I guess I can't assume that Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland are Nazi ruled at this time as well, but I'll find out when I read the book, I suppose. And it's about 2 teenage girls who are neighbours, one of whom is a ideal young Nazi follower. Her family are very much involved in the Nazi party, and the other whom is a radical, and about their relationship. So it sounds pretty fascinating. But the last pile of books are all from Faber and Faber. I went to a lovely event at Faber one evening during the week where I got to see some of the archives and eat donuts. So I was pretty happy that day, and they also gave me some proofs, so I'm going to show those to you now. The first one I'm really excited about, and it's The Doll Funeral by Kate Hammer, and her other book, The Red Coat, The Girl in the Red Coat, was everywhere, and I almost picked up a few times. I kept seeing it. This one sounds even creepier, so I'm super excited for this one. And I am going to do the blasphemous and read the back because it sounds so creepy, okay? My name is Ruby. I live with Barbara and Mick. They are not my real parents, but they tell me what to do and what to say. I'm supposed to say that the bruises on my arms and the black eye came from falling down the stairs. But there are things I won't say. I won't tell them about going to hunt for my real parents. I won't say a word about Shadow, who sits on the stairs, or the wasp lady I saw on the way to bed. I did tell Mick that I saw the woman in the buttercup dress, hanging upside down from her seatbelt deep in the forest at the back of our house. I told him I saw death crawl out of her. He said he'd give me a medal for lying. I wasn't lying. I'm a hunter for lost souls, and I'm going to be with my real family, and I'm not going to let Mick stop me. So yeah. Then we have a non-fiction book, which is Future Sex by Emily Witt, and this is all about one woman who decides to explore alternatives to monogamy. She's exploring the different options for sexual relationships and practices that exist today, getting involved with different groups, and just trying to see whether monogamy is really the only option. So sounds really interesting and could go so many different directions. Then we have This Is Memorial Day by David Keenan, and again, I just really like the sound of this one based on the back. It says, the story of a cast of misfits, artists, dropouts, visionaries and musicians in a time where anything seemed possible. This is Memorial Device. Did I say Memorial Day? Sorry. This is Memorial Device is the debut novel by David Keenan. It is a love letter to the small towns of Lancashire in the west of Scotland in the late 1970s and early 80s, as they were temporarily transformed by the endless possibilities that came out of the free fall from punk rock. So that sounds really awesome. One I might even give to my dad when I'm done with that, because I mean that's my parents' generation, the 70s, and punk rock in Scotland. So maybe they'd enjoy this one, and it's something I've always found really fascinating hearing them talk about, so I'm fascinated by this book. Then we have Who Killed Audrey Marshall, which is about a woman who does a house swap with her cousin and goes to stay in her cousin's apartment in New York, but finds out shortly after arriving that her cousin's next door neighbour has just been murdered. But somehow I think that's plenty to be getting along with, don't you? It is quite nice to get a few new books though, because it means there is a little less empty space in our new living room in my new flat with my flatmate. I'm starting to fill up the bookshelf, which is really nice. But if you've read any of these books and have any thoughts on them, or would like to know more about them and want to see reviews, then do let me know. But until next time guys, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!